Hey YouTube. As we're wrapping up 2019, I wanted to do a kind of review, but rather than just kind of going through the highlights of my year, um, I wanted to instead use some of the year cards that I have been not even actively working with, but just that have been there for me this year as a kind of frame for talking about 2019 and the transition into 2020. So there are a few cards that I want to talk about, and they dovetail together really nicely. So to start out, I'll just name what those cards are. So there's the if you're familiar with the like numerological way of calculating a year card for yourself or for the collective, we've all been in a hanged year, and which is also the energy of the Empress, because 12 reduces to 3, so it's been a hanged Empress year in 2019. For me, calculating based on my birth date, it's been a star year, but with strength also in that, because 17 reduces down to 8, and I use 8 as strength. Is a system I prefer. Then I also pulled cards at the beginning of the year, and the card I pulled for the teacher for this year was the High Priestess, as well as the deepest lesson. I pulled a card for the deepest lesson of this year and got the Empress, so reflecting back to that collective card. And then finally, I got a Femcast from Crystal at Power Fem Tarot, and the year card that she pulled for me was the Visionary of Vessels, or Queen of Cups, which, as if you're familiar with tarot, that and the High Priestess go really well together. So there's like a lot of similar energy, but what I think is interesting is what I expected at the beginning of the year, seeing these cards, was very different from how the year actually rolled out. But in thinking about it, I realize how my year does relate to those cards, not in the way I expected. When I started out, I thought, oh, okay, so I've got like High Priestess energy, I've got Queen of Cups energy, like there's going to be a lot of like deep exploration. I'm going to be really active in my tarot practice, astrology practice, expecting there to be a lot more like active work. But if I were paying attention, I would note that it is collectively a hanged year. And the hanged is all about non-action, about sitting with the discomfort, about not moving. And that, I think, has been more prominent or noticeable for me this year. The feeling of kind of stuckness. And it's interesting because we're moving into Emperor in 2020, and we're closing out the decade in this way that I think is like a really kind of cool, like synchronous feeling of like the preparation we have to do to be in a more active state for 2020. But for me, it is definitely manifested as it's just been a year of a lot of like non-movement, a lot of stuckness, a lot of low energy, especially like my health. A lot of stuff has come up around health for me, around energy, around chronic illness, a lot of guilt around my productivity in my job, which is like, it's interesting to look back. Some folks are suggesting like, hey, this is a good time to look back and like, where were you in 2009 as we were moving into this decade? And I thought about that in 2009, so the end of the year in 2009, I graduated law school, middle of the year, and there were no jobs. You may recall 2009, really bad economic time in the United States. So I moved to Baltimore looking for a job in DC. There was nothing there. So I had like a really shitty, had a call center job as a hard of hearing person. Where I got that idea, I do not know. But I worked in a call center. I was had not yet fully come to terms with the level of depression I was experiencing. I was very like dependent on the couple of relationships I was in, both of which were long distance, and one of which I later sort of came to terms with it being an emotionally abusive relationship. I was just, not in a great place. And if I compare that to where I am now, I have a lot of gratitude to think like, God, like I'm, way more financially stable, way happier in my career, happier in a relationship, but more specifically, like who I am, what I bring to relationships is very different, very confident, very me-centered, not like them-centered, not letting other people decide for me what my mental health is, which was, I think, a lot of what led to the abusiveness of that relationship. Just a lot of things. But there is still a feeling of like this being a transitional year, or a year of like, oh, I want things to happen and they're not happening. And so there is that feeling of the hanged, whereas at the same time, the main developments that have happened this year, like the things that have happened, so I haven't been like super, my tarot practice slowed down a lot this year, so it didn't feel very High Priestess or Queen of Cups. It didn't feel like I was doing a lot of intuitive work. But the things that did move for me or did happen this year have sort of been related to relationship. And, I started a new relationship, and also, I never know how to describe it, like a relationship or friendship, a very like close connection with my metamor in that relationship. So both of those people have become like really dear people to me that I never expected, that I met early in the year. And that, I think, for me is where the Empress energy comes in, and the deepest lesson of the year for me being the Empress. I can see how I had to like be comfortable with receiving from that relationship, be comfortable with receiving care and receiving affection in a place where I didn't feel like I deserved it, because I wasn't super accomplished or active. That can be, I think, one of the toughest ways to receive is when you don't feel like you've earned it. But that's capitalism for you. So it is like the Hanged offering kind of a chance to sit with and try to subtly shift that perspective of a transactional nature and learn to receive even when you're in a place of feeling stuck and like you can't give a lot back necessarily. So that has been a big lesson. Thinking about like my personal year card or cards, the star and then strength underneath that. Again, I thought that like the star being about healing. I did have a big tower year last year. I thought healing would look very different. I thought healing would be very active. I thought healing would be about spending a lot of time with the cards, and it wasn't really. So thinking about how the Hanged energy can be healing, how can stuckness be healing, how can letting health stuff come up doesn't feel very healing, but it is kind of a detox or a process of like recognizing I'm just coming to terms with using the term chronically ill to describe myself, and what does that mean, and what does it mean that like health conditions that I have are not probably treatable. And so how do I sit with my energy levels potentially being low or lower for the rest of my life? That is a kind of deep but difficult healing that has had to happen this year. And underneath it, the strength, I've been pulling strength all year. That's one of my two biggest repeater cards, Strength and Ace of Cups. And I'll talk about that a little in one of the 31 Days of Tarot videos coming up in January. But underlying energy, the kind of strength that is required to move through that healing the kind of, facing and internalizing fears, or internalizing, like, even I think coming to accept an identity, or coming to like fold disability into an identity, can really be a strength moment, because it is about accepting the parts of ourselves that we have been trying to separate from. And I think that could actually be true of any identity anything about ourselves that we like fold into our identity can be a moment of like strength, like integration, and that's been a theme as well for this year. And then when I do think about, like, back to the Queen of Cups and back to the High Priestess, where is that in all of this? It has felt more present for me at the end of this year, as I've been on sabbatical and I've been really digging in deep, coming back to tarot, coming back to astrology. It feels more obvious now, but I think it's the challenge is to think to myself, like, in what ways is the stuckness or the non-motion or the non-practice even actually part of intuition? Like, in what ways sometimes our intuition might tell us to pause, might tell us not to pull cards, and it's not to say, I think if you're struggling with pulling cards when it's difficult, then of course, like, that's a great challenge to set for yourself. But I think it's possible that sometimes intuition can actually lead you to just not be as engaged with your practice, and maybe the thing you need is to like watch television or whatever, and like that's okay. And so that is something that I'm like going deeper, working with the High Priestess, Queen of Cups archetypes, is like, how can they show up? How can deep intuition show up in different ways than what I would jump to immediately when thinking about those cards, and going deeper with them by thinking about how they act in periods of stillness. So yeah, honestly, I think that is like a good summary of my year. It would be almost hard to do the year in like events, because sure, I've like, had some trips and done some stuff, but it hasn't been an activity-based year. In a lot of ways, like, the summary of my year has been a bit of like stuckness and frustration with the bonus energy of these new relationships, and moving into 2020, which will be an Emperor year for the collective, and will be a Hermit year for me. So that is interesting. Emperor has this feeling of groundedness, stability, not action, sort of. I don't know. Like, it's, I guess fours are more about structure and stability and the foundation from which action can spring. But I think it can be an active energy, and thinking about Hermit combined with that, maybe next year is the actual year that I go more deep introspectively and do more of my practice and learn more about myself, because Hermit is a more, compared to like the Hanged, for example, is definitely a more active exploration kind of card. And I don't know what the other cards will be. I haven't pulled or received cards yet, and so we'll see. But that's sort of my summary. I would love to hear in the comments below, like, how has the collective energies of the Hanged and Empress shown up in your life in 2019, and have your personal year cards shown up? And of course, if you're not already, don't forget to subscribe, because I've got lots of great content coming to you in 2020.